This is gonna end up too long. We'll see how this goes. I might just delete it afterwards, but okay. So one of the biggest, one of the differences that I've been like thinking about more lately, in terms of difference between what we do on the ERG versus what's going on in the water, and why there's like a slight different feeling very slight different feeling between how you paddle here and versus on the water. Obviously, you know. It's easy to talk about, oh, well, this is a rope and the paddle is a paddle when you're on the water. But in terms of how the forces are interacting, so like at the beginning here when we're going into the catch, so especially as we're catching down this way, so let me just freeze it right here. Okay, so I'm gonna highlight this just so we can kind of look at some of these things. So I'm gonna draw a green line so you can see kind of how the rope is pointed right at the front here. Okay, the rope that you're pulling against is kind of in this direction, right? So in terms of if we look at how the force components are, basically we have a portion of force. If you break down geometrically, right, you have a portion of force that's going this way and a small portion that goes up, right? Like that, right? So if you look at the two different directions that perpendicular to this blue line, you have a force component against it, but also a portion going up the shaft, right? So if I undo these lines, right, when we're paddling in water, right, the surface of the paddle, okay, when you pull against the paddle, right, the direction of the force is always going to be perpendicular to the paddle, right? So if we were to draw a line for the correct line of which way the force is going to feel is this way, right? Mm-hmm. So that's for this particular angle. Now let's go to the next angle. Okay, so let's think about what's going on here, right? So here the paddle's down like this, right? This is the next snapshot, right? And I'm gonna again draw a green line that's connecting from here to that white pulley, right? Same with mine over here. So again, we have a green line. That's the force that's pulling against the ERG paddle, right? Mm-hmm. But in the water, if it's perpendicular to the blue line, right, it's actually this way, right? Okay, so I know this is getting really messy, so let's just clean this up real quick, and let's just, ooh. Okay, we're gonna clean this up a bit, and let's just first we're gonna talk about the force that we're feeling on the ERG. Okay, because remember, I mean, I used to always talk about, oh, your top arm pressure should be in line with the paddle, right? So I was always talking about, okay, you guys need to be pushing down on the paddle in the direction of the paddle, right? Press down on it. Yeah. Press down on it, right? And that kind of makes sense if you think about the reaction force of this on the ERG, because the ERG is always going to have some portion of this green line here. Some portion is going to be pointed up, but some portion is going to be pointed this way, right? But it's kind of a combination of those two forces. But on the water, right, most of the force that you're going to be feeling against you on the water, what color can I use? I'll use this white one. Most of it on the water is just going to be this way, right? And to really counteract that, so if I want to make sure that my paddle doesn't push back at me, so the equal and opposite force that's going to be you're going to be kind of feeling in your top hand is actually going to be kind of pushing that way, right? So I've kind of, oops.
Uh-oh.
Sorry.
I wanted a new one anyway.
Okay, so I know I'm breaking away from this video right now, but to kind of demonstrate to you guys, right? So if I want the top handle here, because I want, you're trying to keep the top portion of your paddle as the pivot point, because you don't want anywhere on the paddle to be at the pivot point. Because if you pivot around here, then you're just gonna slip through the water, right? So the strongest pivot point is to keep this as the pivot point, and then you're gonna kind of follow it as you're pulling through. So if I were to isolate how the paddle's moving through, it's mainly you're trying to keep this top portion from coming back at you, right? So when I'm pulling against the water, right, we're talking about the force is going to be perpendicular this way, right? So if it's going this way, then the top is going to be coming at me, right? So in order to counteract that, you're thinking, actually, okay, it's going to be kind of just holding it from collapsing in on you, right? So it's more of a, instead of just thinking about down, it's also just holding this, yeah. So that's why we're talking about like the chest being important by the pressure, but I think this is a better explanation of why we want that versus the other way, right? Okay, so yeah, I know this is kind of a long-winded explanation, but in terms of how you're feeling it, so I think it gets really important as we get to the back half of the pool. So if we look, as we get into this portion, as we continue this pressure, right? So I would say the last third of the pool, going from here to here, it gets even more drastic, because if I connect a line from here to here, now a lot of the force is going up the paddle shaft. So on the erg, you're going to do well by just really shoving this against the paddle shaft, and you can get a lot more out of the back end by pushing really hard down that way. But on the water, right, when we get to that point, so on the water, when we get to that point, the paddle force is kind of pointed that way, right? So to counteract the force that's actually pointed up this way, you basically just want to be holding that paddle from coming out towards you, right? So when you get especially to this point, if you spend too much energy pushing down straight this way, then the paddle ends up slipping through the water a little bit. So that's something that, yeah, I think I'm gonna have to try to teach a little bit more to the team, but yeah, I would just be careful. So I think most of what you're doing in the front here is pretty similar. It's just what I'm watching a little bit more for this year is making sure that people don't spend. So especially as soon as you get to around your hip, that should be as much as you should be going. Because I see some people really get extra meters by doing something at the end where they're really shoving their top arm back. So if you end up shoving your top arm really strong at the end there, then you get more meters here, but you don't get it on the water. Sorry, that was like a long...
He's teaching us a trick.
Long explanation.